You know how there's always one person in a group who ends up planning the entire trip? Booking the hotel, finding the cool restaurants, figuring out the transfers, creating the spreadsheet nobody asked for, but everybody benefits from? Yeah, hi, that's me. And I'm thinking after working with Ford to plan my 3-month sabbatical across Europe that my second act might be doing this professionally. Because that's a possibility for you and for me. Fora gives people the opportunity to build a travel business of their own using skills they already have. Things like relationship building, organization, attention to detail, helping people create meaningful experiences. Honestly, a lot of women I know have been doing these things professionally and personally for years without totally realizing their transferable skills. And Fora provides the training, technology, and support to help you build your travel business on your own terms and on your own schedule. So, your next act starts here. Become a Fora advisor today at foratravel.com/woman. That's FORA travel.com/woman. And make sure you tell them that we sent you. foratravel.com/woman. Here's something most of us business owners don't like to admit, that more often than not, we are the bottleneck. Not because we're incapable. Usually it's because we're still trying to handle everything. And smart business owners stop doing that faster. Because the fastest growing businesses aren't the ones doing more. They're delegating smarter. Upwork helps grow your business by giving you fast access to specialized talent across 125 plus categories. So you can fill skill gaps, launch projects faster, and scale support up or down without committing to full-time headcount. With Business Plus, you can access the top 1% of talent on Upwork, and with AI-powered shortlisting, you'll get matched to the right freelancer in under 6 hours. No endless searching required. And Upwork also handles things like contracts and payments in one place. So go visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com. I'm Nicole Khalil, and you're listening to the This Is Woman's Work podcast, where together we're redefining what it means, what it looks and feels like to be doing woman's work in the world today. And listen, it's important that we acknowledge that work in general doesn't look like how it used to. It used to be that we'd show up somewhere, clock in, do our job, get paid. And now work is everywhere. It's a laptop, a login, a platform. It's side hustles, virtual schedules, flexible schedules, which somehow just means working all of the time. It's manifesting in mindset, leadership and entrepreneurship, branding and targeting campaigns. And as work has expanded, so has the gap between who gets paid and who doesn't. There are a lot of reasons for that: technology, education, access. But one moment that really reshaped how we think about work was COVID. It forced us to look at pretty much everything. And at the beginning, especially, it required us to define work as essential or not. And so, yes, of course, doctors, nurses, teachers, essential. But also grocery clerks, delivery drivers, the people who stock our shelves, the people who made sure we could eat, function, and survive. And I'll be honest, I thought that moment might reset something for us, that we'd take a hard look at who we rely on versus who we reward. Because, and I'm going to say this even though it calls me out too, the people that are making the most money are far too often not the ones doing the most essential work. Because here's what really happens. We're willing to call people essential right up until it's time to pay them like they're essential. Then suddenly the narrative shifts and we start hearing terms like low skill, entry level, replaceable, which is convenient, because it lets us all keep benefiting from the system without having to really question it. So if we're actually serious about redefining women's work, then we have to include the work that has always been dismissed, underpaid, and often disproportionately carried by women. And we've got to ask better questions about why. Because there is no such thing as unskilled labor. There is only labor we've decided not to respect. We've bought into this idea that wages reflect value, and they don't. They reflect power and privilege. And we've been conditioned to believe that where we shop, what we pay, and how we participate in these systems is somehow separate from the people who work within them, and it's not. If where we spend our money is a vote, and I believe that it is, then we're casting ballots every single day for the kind of system we say that we don't want. And corporations will keep getting away with the things we hate unless we stop funding them. So, we're going to talk about that today. And our guest is Ann Larson, a journalist and activist whose writing on education, debt, and low wage work has appeared in The New Republic, The Chronicle of Higher Education, Fast Company, and The Nation. She's co author of Can't Pay, Won't Pay, The Case for Economic Disobedience and Debt Abolition, and a fellow with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. Her latest book, Clean Up on Aisle 5, takes us inside the supermarket, not as shoppers, but from behind the register, challenging how we see essential work, poverty wages, and our own role within the system. And thank you for being here. And I'd love to start here, basically, because we're going to use supermarkets as the lens for this conversation. And you actually worked within one. What did that show you about the reality of what we call essential work that most of us don't see as customers or consumers?
Well, hi. Well, first of all, thank you, Nicole, so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for that very astute introduction, which just covers a lot of the themes that I think are so important to this conversation. Let me start by explaining kind of how I got a job at the supermarket. I was a white-collar worker. I was a former academic. I have a PhD. I was teaching part-time. I was a co-founder of an organization called the Debt Collective that helped student loan debtors get debt relief from the federal government. So I was, I had a salary. For a lot of the time, I was middle class. Then in 2020, something happened that I found myself unexpectedly unemployed. And I was in my 40s. And this was spring, fall of 2020. It was very bad timing. So the pandemic hit right around that time, as I'm sure you'll all recall, and everything shut down. I had a hard time finding work. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I really needed an income and I needed health insurance. Supermarkets in my area were hiring. They were doing very brisk business. And so I figured I could work in a store, I'd earn an income, and I thought this will just be a part-time thing until the pandemic ends. I'll find my next real job. But the experience that I had behind the supermarket register was so enlightening and so troubling that I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and I wrote a book about it. So Clean Up on Aisle 5 tells the story of my year working in the store. And as you mentioned, what I saw was that there's this kind of hidden reality that goes on behind the scenes that customers don't see. And one of the things that comes out when you participate in this hidden reality and see it is that these myths about grocery work as low skilled, as something that people do, kind of in a short term basis before they move on to something quote unquote better. These are all myths. These are all false. Grocery work is highly skilled labor. And most grocery workers are women, and cashiers. I worked in an area of my store called the front end, where all the frontline workers are employed. 70% of cashiers are women. And when I was on the job, they earned under $15 an hour. So we have a contradiction here between the highly skilled work, the essential nature of that work. As you mentioned, during the pandemic, all of us counted on grocery workers going to their jobs so that we could shop for groceries. And then the fact that these people are so underpaid, they often can't even afford their own groceries. So what I got on the job, in addition to seeing this hidden reality that I talk about in the book, is this lesson in universalism and interdependence. Like, I realize as a shopper, I'm better off when the person behind the check stand who's selling me my groceries has a living wage, has good health insurance. We should value that work, but not just appreciate it and respect it, but also pay people material benefits, wages, health insurance, pensions, and those kinds of things that other people take for granted.
You said so many important things in there. And while I don't appreciate that you had a situation where unexpected, and I appreciate that you got this experience, because hearing from somebody who is highly skilled, who is an academic, to hear you say this is highly skilled work, I think goes
Yes.
a long way. But for the doubters, can you share what skills are being employed at a high level in environments like this that we are undervaluing or not even acknowledging?
Yes, yes. Thank you for asking. I just want listeners to imagine you're a cashier at a check stand in a busy store. You see hundreds of shoppers a day that come through your check stand. And every single think of the communication skills that are required to address each person as an individual, to make sure their needs are met, to answer any questions they might have. It's just the interpersonal skills. People who work everybody who has a job working with people knows how valuable and how difficult interpersonal skills are to attain. It's not something everybody has. But a cashier in a grocery store, you see hundreds of people who all have questions, who all have needs. And not only are you having to speak to them, give them proper customer service, be kind, be attentive, you also have to pay attention. Am I scanning this correctly? Is this coming up the right price? Am I entering the right produce code? What's the payment method going to be? Do I have to get ready to accept a check? Do I have to, are they going to pay with the credit card? Do I have enough bags next to me to help me bag these groceries? So it's multitasking. There are many things going on at once. Also, knowledge of the store. Customers want to know, where's the applesauce? Where's the sun-dried tomatoes? My store was huge. It was 65,000 square feet, but it wasn't any larger than your typical grocery store. And employees have this vast knowledge of what the store, where items are located in the store and how to find them. So I would say a combination of communication skills, technical knowledge, how to operate the register. I write in my book how difficult it was for me to learn how to operate that cash register. It took weeks for me to become even a little bit comfortable. I was very intimidated by the process. And even after I worked at the store a year, there were things I was still learning about how to operate those machines. At a certain point in my job, they replaced many of the cash registers with self-checkout machines. And people think, oh, that's just the customer then checks themselves out. And that's really not true. The cashier who works that station has to know how to operate those machines. This is a technical skill that people have to learn if they're going to help shoppers who are trying to operate those machines. I was not given a raise to learn how to operate self-checkout machines. It was just considered a new technical skill that I had to master. So I could go on, but there are just a number of skills, and you have to have them all at the ready. At any moment, anybody could ask you something, a problem could arise, and you've got to be able to think on your feet.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you're kind of the first line of defense for everything, right? And
Yes,
this organization or corporation does not profit without you being there to facilitate all of these things. And
that's right.
yet, as you said, a lot of these people aren't making enough to afford their own groceries or their own
Right.
livelihoods. Then add to that, most people in supermarkets or in some of these essential working environments that are being undervalued are not getting any kind of benefits, right?
Right.
No 401k, no
Right.
PTO, no
Right.
maternity leave or what have you.
Oh, of course not.
So,
Yeah.
how does that work for somebody in that situation? Like, how are they saving for retirement if they can't afford groceries? And then, how is that a problem for all of us? Because it is. How do they handle it when they have an illness? Or how are people living through these things?
Well, they are not living through it. Many of them, let me just tell you a story about one of my colleagues at the store. It was a 79-year-old woman who had been bagging at the store for about a decade when I met her. So at 79 years old, she had a job in her early years when she was in her 20s, and then she got married and had some children, and her husband died in an accident. There's a whole she had a lot of bad luck, but long story short, she ended up at 79 years old. She couldn't her social security wasn't enough to finance her lifestyle, so she's still bagging groceries at the supermarket at the age of 79. Now, I want to be clear that my colleague loved her job. She claimed, I love my customers. I like coming to work every day. It gives me something to do. But nevertheless, she was sick. She was elderly and she had constant problems. Like she constantly had to take days off because she was sick or ill. Sometimes being on her feet so long, her ankles would swell up and she couldn't walk and she would have to go home. So this was somebody who was really struggling at a time in her life when she should have been able to retire. And maybe if you want to pick up a shift now and then part-time because you like going to the grocery store, that's fine. But this was an economic necessity for an elderly woman that should not have been in that position. So a lot of times what people do is they just kind of try to keep working as long as they can and hope for the best. I mean, we are in a crisis when it comes to retirement. there is almost no better example of the economic inequality in our country, that affluent people can go off, retire at an age that seems appropriate, live, go traveling, enjoy themselves, and yet we have a class of people, including many grocery workers, who simply have to work until they die.
Sorry to break in, but this part matters. Rate the show, share it, and support the sponsor so I can keep making episodes worth interrupting you for. I don't know about you, but nobody told me that one of the hardest and frankly most annoying parts of being a mom would be answering all of the questions. Like, I did not sign up to man the family help desk, but here we are. And I could give you a list of the daily questions, but I know that you know. And I know that we all love our families, but one day, one of these questions is going to be what puts us over the edge, right? So for my sanity and everyone else's safety, we now have a Skylight calendar sitting right on our mudroom counter where everyone can see it. Skylight Calendar is designed to bring families together, and it syncs with Google and Apple calendars, Outlook, all of it. So everyone can see what's happening without me needing to verbally deliver updates. And it took me less than 5 minutes to set up. Listen, families are better when they're working together. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to myskylight.com/womanswork. Go to myskylight.com/womanswork for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's myskylight.com/womanswork. This message is sponsored by Greenlight. And not only am I a fan, but our kids are too. Here's JJ's oldest friend, Rye, here to tell you all about it.
I'm pretty good at remembering to do my chores. My mom, not so good at remembering to pay me. And when I tell her how much she owes me, she never believes me. That's why we use Greenlight. The Greenlight app has a chores feature that lets you set up jobs, track what's been done, and even sends reminders, so neither of us have any excuses anymore. It's also a debit card and money app for kids, teens, and really the whole family. I can earn, save, spend my own money, and see where it's going. It's not red light, not yellow light, it's green light, and green means go. So go start building your money skills now, and maybe even teach your parents a thing or two later.
And let me jump in to say that every day our kids are handling money without guidance is a missed opportunity. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/TIWW. Don't wait to teach your kids real-world money skills. That's greenlight.com/TIWW to get started. Greenlight.com/TIWW.
LinkedIn's AI-powered job search can help you find the most relevant roles based on your goals and experience. It cannot help you find something to talk about in the elevator.
So, ride any dragons this weekend?
It can help you find your next job just by describing it in your own words. It cannot stop your coworker from describing their dreams.
So I was flying, right?
And while we can't help you advance in the office foosball tournament, LinkedIn can help you advance in your career. LinkedIn is the network that works for you.
I hope that we all agree that every person deserves the dignity of a living wage and a retirement. So I'm just going to use that as a baseline for our conversation. If you're tuning in and you don't agree with that, well, then fuck off. But if that is the case, if we believe that we all deserve the dignity of a living wage and a retirement, how do we support making it so? My first question is, what can we do as consumers, as shoppers, as people who are funding these organizations and keeping them in business? How do we as shoppers impact the people working within the organizations that we frequent getting a living wage?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me just start, before I answer that question, just saying a little bit about how serious this crisis is. A couple of years ago, a report came out showing that about 3/4 of workers at Kroger, the second largest grocery company in the nation, 3/4 of workers were food insecure, meaning they skipped meals. They didn't have enough money to fill their cupboards between paychecks, and they would go to work. These are people who sell food for a living, who are not able to meet their grocery bills. So this is 75% of workers at Kroger, according to one study. A bunch of those workers relied on food aid. So you've got a cashier who is earning not enough money for food, and so she herself is relying on SNAP benefits in order to feed her kids and to take care of her family. So we are in a real crisis in terms of wages for retail workers and the people that do this essential work. This is a very good question in terms of what shoppers can do. I mean, there are a few things. One thing is to talk to I'm really a big advocate of just talking to people. When you go into your store, there's this kind of like, there's the shoppers and the workers, and they're separated by the check stand. And we don't see ourselves as part of the same community or having the same needs. But in fact, our needs overlap. If your cashier is hungry, if she doesn't have health insurance, if she's got a toothache that she can't afford to fix, all of these things happen at my store. I had one cashier who left the job early because she started her period and she couldn't afford maxi pads. So she had to go home.
Jesus.
I mean,
Okay.
this is literally happened while I was on the job. A couple of cashiers wore diapers because behind their check stand because breaks were so hard to get. And so they were worried about, having an accident behind the check stand. I mean, this is really undignified for these women that work in these roles. So what can shoppers do? Talk to the people in your store. I really came to see the supermarket as one of the few places in society where we actually cross paths with people that are in that are in a different social class than we might be, where middle-class people and working-class people kind of interact. You go to the supermarket and there are people from all walks of life there. There are not many places in society where that happens. So I would say get to know the people that work in your store, talk to them. I mean, I'm not saying you have to grill them about their working conditions. Some of them might be uncomfortable about that, but talk to them, say hello, ask them how they're doing. Let them know that you care and that you see them. A lot of times cashiering can feel kind of invisible. Customers coming through, they pay, hi, and they're just on their way. If you communicate to your cashier that you see them, that you see them as a human being with needs, that you care about their health, their pay, that really goes a long way towards making that job a little more dignified, which is, I think, the goal. In terms of policy, there are also some things that we can do. Shoppers should really be taking the lead on demanding that retail workers have options to create unions. Unionization is the number one thing that will lead to higher pay and better working conditions. Invariably, where grocery workers are unionized, they are better off. But we have some barriers to that in our country, including my store was in Utah. So this is a state where there are legal barriers to organizing. They call it a right to work state. We need to get rid of right to work laws. These are just horrible anti-worker laws. And there is a bill in Congress right now. It's called the PRO Act. And we can encourage members of the Senate. It's already passed the House several years ago. We can encourage members of the Senate to pass the PRO Act. And that would eliminate these right to work laws that make it difficult for workers to organize, especially in really hostile places. I also think SNAP. We need to expand SNAP benefits. SNAP is a program that allows people, low-income people, to buy food. That program has been cut over recent years. Trump just made huge cuts to SNAP. Biden added work requirements to SNAP. I mean, this is all just undignified. People should have a fundamental right to food. We should expand SNAP benefits. We should remove the means testing. If you need food to feed your children, you should be able to get government support for that. And finally, I'll just mention, I could go on, but I'll mention one other thing that I think is really important, and that's universal health care. It's very, very expensive. Healthcare costs keep going up and up and up. At $15 an hour, people cannot afford their healthcare premiums. We need to have a public healthcare system that people can buy into, or Medicare for all, some way that people who are doing our society's essential labor, or anybody who needs healthcare, can afford it. And those are some policy programs that I just think are essential to solving this problem.
So really important things in there. And I just want to reiterate kind of what I heard is a reminder that we need people in these jobs. These are essential workers. And I just, again, fundamentally believe that people in this country should be able to eat and access health care regardless of their job status. I think sometimes people are like, oh, we don't have the money for that, or that's going to negatively impact me. And the reality is it may negatively impact the richest among us, but we're not talking about them not being able to eat or not being able to get healthcare. We're talking about what size yacht or private jet or fucking vacation they are going to go on. These people having basic needs met, food and healthcare, only in my mind can impact us positively because we sort of end up paying for it anyway, right? What are your reactions to any of that?
I came away from the supermarket really, you kind of understand inequality in the abstract, inequality in the sense of like a certain group of people who are doing our society's most essential labor can't afford to feed themselves. But seeing it up close, many of my colleagues couldn't afford their own groceries. Several of them were relied on SNAP benefits. Almost nobody could afford health care. And yet, I'm telling you, I worked alongside colleagues, they loved their jobs. They loved coming to work. They valued customer service. They saw customer service as not just a job description, something like, oh, I need to do this because this is how I get my money. But no, they saw it as a social value. I have a chapter in my book called Community, where I show all the different ways that store workers treated customers who came in as like members of the community. They're neighbors. They come through your check stand. You've seen them before. How's it going? Hey, how was the baseball game last night? Did your kid do well in the spelling bee? I mean, these kind of community. Many of us live lives that are so isolating now. Only hang out with us, maybe a small number of people. We can feel cut off from community. The supermarket's really a place where colleagues that I worked with really tried to work against that tendency. They cared about their jobs. They took pride in doing them well. And yet I couldn't help but see that sometimes felt like a one-way street where we were doing all we could to maintain that sense of community, especially during the pandemic when many people were isolated at home and stuck at home and didn't go out. That, grocery workers really tried to give people that sense of community when they came out of the house. But I couldn't help but see, it felt like a one-way street in that, again, we are struggling to pay our bills. We're struggling to stay housed. We're struggling to see a doctor where we need medical care. That tension really was profoundly affected me and how I saw the grocery store from then on. And it just also I think the grocery store, in some ways, we're not even talking about the supermarket, right? We're talking about what kind of society do we want to have? What kind of world do we want to live in? And the argument that I make in the book is that by improving the lives of supermarket workers, by making retail workers, by acknowledging and in a material way the essential work that they do, we make society better for all of us. That this is about all of us, not just the people who work in the store. And I just think if we can make those connections, we need to start connecting our experience in stores as shoppers. We need to start connecting our experience in stores to the labor conditions of the people that work in them. And I think that's another step we can take. If you walk into a store and people are a little bit rude or surly or they don't seem friendly, it might be that, they're underpaid and can't afford health insurance.
Yeah. I want to lean in on that a little bit. As shoppers, I think one of the biggest ways we can communicate is through our spending power.
Yes.
And sometimes I get a little bit worried, well, I boycott a certain store. Does that negatively impact the people working in it even more? Are they going to lose jobs or get paid less? And then the flip side is if we put pressure on people, then maybe the conditions will change. Any thoughts on when we should use our spending power against some of these corporations? Like you were talking about Kroger earlier. I don't shop there. We don't have one close by. I wouldn't. But if I did and heard that, I would stop shopping there now.
I think there are certainly ways we can use our dollars to indicate, to force change. I would never, boycotts can be very useful. Historically, they've been very useful. I would say, though, that one of the problems that we have is that these companies are gigantic, right? Kroger is the second largest grocery company. Walmart is one of the largest private employers in the country. Think about this for a second. 4 companies sell about 50% of every single grocery item purchased in the United States. Just 4 companies. So these companies are so large that we really have to think differently about how to force them to change their practices and to change their behavior and to raise wages, to treat workers well. And so one of the things I advocate in the book is enforcement of our country's antitrust laws. This is a little bit wonky, but we have laws in this country against giant corporations taking over whole industries. And we have not been enforcing those laws in recent years. Since about the Reagan administration, we used to enforce them in the early 20th century during the progressive era. We used these laws to take down Standard Oil and these kind of large companies because we knew that as companies get larger and larger and larger, wages get lower, prices get higher. It's not good for the public. But later in the 20th century, starting in about the 1980s, we stopped enforcing antitrust laws. Politicians kind of had this idea that, well, a bigger company simply means better efficiency, lower prices. They can get more items on the shelf because they have more efficient supply chain. We started this idea kind of became dominant that bigger is better. And I just think that in recent years, that has turned out to not be the case. It doesn't serve anyone when 4 corporations control the grocery market.
Yeah, well, it serves probably like 4 or 5 people.
Right,
But yeah.
exactly. There was a study just recently that came out, I think earlier this year or last year, that showed when a Walmart superstore establishes itself in a local community, the poverty rate skyrockets. And so everybody knows Walmart's famous for low prices, right? But even if they offer basic goods at lower prices, it doesn't make up for the fact that they bring wages down, they close local businesses can't survive. It really makes a community poorer, even though you can go buy, your jar of salsa for 50 cents less. So we need to start understanding something that might seem convenient, that might seem better in the short term is really not so good in the long term. So part of the argument I make in the book is that we need to enforce our country's antitrust laws. There was a slight turn in the right direction during the Biden administration. The Federal Trade Commission, which was led by Lena Khan, began prosecuting companies for violating antitrust laws. And that was a really good step. But now that we have a new administration, those cases mostly have been abandoned, and we've gone back to sort of back to the sort of 1980s view of things where bigger is better. So there have been signs in recent years of a change. But another thing shoppers can do is, it sounds wonky, but urge your elected officials, vote for people who vow to enforce antitrust, and make sure this is not saying all corporations are bad or that we should not have any big companies. It's just about leveling the playing field and saying, look, you can't control the entire market. We need small business. We need medium-sized business. And it's about making things a little bit more fair for workers as well as shoppers. It's another example of the fact that it's not that raising workers' wages is going to harm us. On the contrary, we have these shared and overlapping needs as shoppers and workers.
I'm going to speak for myself. When it comes to antitrust law, I feel like I have very little impact. I can make a phone call, but outside of that and how I vote, I just feel like I have such little impact. And so I tend to lean towards shopping locally, shopping directly,
Yes.
right? Like instead of going to Walmart, which I will never shop at, I will find the people who sell the products I'm looking for and just buy directly from them whenever possible. Or even weigh out which is the best of the corporate options. Like I prefer to shop at Trader Joe's, and I'm sure if I go digging at some point, maybe I'll find some. But
Yeah.
again, are these helpful? I want to be helpful. I also just want to be mindful. I consider my dollars like a vote, and so I do
Yes.
not vote for certain corporations.
I think that you're absolutely right. That instinct is absolutely right. I think in addition to reforming the corporate structure that we have that dominates the grocery industry, we also need to develop and support alternatives. That's absolutely true. Farmers markets, right? Go to your local farmers market, support your local farmers. I go to mine every Saturday. There are co-ops, cooperative stores. Co-ops is such an interesting history all through the 20th century, even before cooperative stores. They were founded, a lot of them in the early 20th century, by Black shoppers. Black shoppers in the early 20th century, they faced racism in stores. They would go into a store, and in the 1910s, 1920s, you would go into a store and all the goods were kept behind a counter. So a clerk, you'd have to go up to a counter and wait, and you'd say, I want a box of this, I want a box of cream of wheat, and the clerk would hand it to you. Or I want a pound of chicken, and the clerk would get it for you. So not only you're in line behind all your neighbors who can hear you talking to the clerk, it was a very public process. But clerks were racist, and they would cheat Black shoppers. They would stick a piece of gum under the scale to charge them extra for meat. They would sell them rotten goods. They were treated horribly in stores. And if you're a Black shopper and you're cheated, you can't call the police because they're probably going to side with the clerk. So we really need to thank Black shoppers in the early 20th century for setting up these cooperative stores that were owned by the community, run by community members, that were an alternative to corporations. There are still cooperative stores out there. That impulse is still out there. I would connect it to this public stores. Many cities have public grocery stores where you can go in and support that are government run and that the food there is subsidized. They get a bad rap because of propaganda from the corporate sector, but public grocery stores, in 2025, the New York City, he was a mayoral candidate at that point, Mayor Zoran Mandami proposed a public grocery store, one in each of the 5 boroughs, as kind of an experiment to help keep grocery prices down. And this is exactly the kind of thing we need to be doing and supporting. There's a lot of propaganda about how these stores are horrible and it's communism and awful stuff. But in fact, this is an alternative to the corporate store. People can go and support these stores. All that the according to what I've read, all that Mondami is proposing to do is to cut out the middleman, so to keep those prices down and offer people a public option. There are many, many ways we can support alternatives to corporate stores, and we should certainly be doing that.
I have so many more questions, but Ann, I just want to thank you for writing this book and for being here today. Listener, go get your hands on it. It's Cleanup on Aisle 5 and available, I'm sure, on Amazon. But let's go to bookshop.org or go to your local bookstore. Keep them in business.
Well said.
And Ann, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure was all mine. All right, friend, a living wage and benefits shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a baseline. And if it's not, we have to stop acting surprised by the consequences of a system that undervalues the very people it depends on. And we don't get to throw up our hands and pretend like we can't do anything about it. We don't get to separate ourselves from it, not as leaders, not as consumers, and not as people who benefit from it. So the question isn't whether this is fair. We already know it's not. The question is what we're willing to tolerate, what we're willing to challenge, and what we're willing to change, starting with what we support and where we spend our money. So go vote with your dollars, because it's the language corporations actually understand. Vote with your dollars, because that is woman's work.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.